The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. Klaus Hoffman, heavy German accent, very polite. "Mr. Crawford, we have discovered a significant problem with Atlantic Industrial's compliance status. Are you available to discuss?" I was drinking coffee in my little office above Murphy's Deli, watching the sunrise over Baltimore Harbor. 6 months and 8 days earlier, they'd restructured my position at Atlantic Industrial. Now I was about to find out they'd made a $650 million mistake. My name's Vince Crawford, 48, and I've been keeping manufacturing companies legally compliant for 16 years. Before that, I spent 22 years in the Navy making sure reactor systems didn't melt down. USS Virginia, USS Hartford, 2 tours on nuclear subs, where attention to detail meant the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. Same principle, different uniform. When something breaks in nuclear engineering, people die. When compliance breaks in manufacturing, companies die. The Navy taught me that every system has backup procedures, every procedure has documentation, and every piece of documentation better be exactly where it's supposed to be when the inspectors show up. Spent my last 8 years as a reactor safety officer, which meant I was the guy who signed off on whether 150 sailors lived or died every time we went to sea. You learn to triple-check everything when the stakes are that high. The day that started this whole mess was a Tuesday too. Preston Walsh walked into our quarterly safety meeting and called my compliance team legacy overhead with pension burdens. I knew right then Atlantic Industrial was heading for a cliff. Preston had that entitled MBA energy you see everywhere now. Designer blazer, fresh manicure, and the kind of confidence that comes from never actually failing at anything that mattered. CEO's nephew, newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer, whatever that meant, in a 127-year-old manufacturing company. Kid probably never held a wrench in his life, but he was going to teach us about efficiency. He didn't shake hands when introduced. He gave finger waves and said things like digital transformation and operational agility while sipping a $12 green smoothie like he'd invented efficiency. Nobody asked him to present that day. Nobody stopped him either. That should have been my first warning. He clicked through a PowerPoint titled Streamlining Legacy Functions, Phase 1. Phase 1, it turned out, was gutting my department. I'd been Atlantic's named SOC2 compliance officer for 8 years. That's 8 years of building safety protocols from scratch, watching regulatory changes sweep through manufacturing like hurricanes, documenting every nightmare scenario the EPA, OSHA, and FDA could throw at us. I had 3 external audits under my belt with 0 violations. My filing cabinets were organized like a Navy ship's inventory system. Everything labeled, dated, cross-referenced. When the Coast Guard or Nuclear Regulatory Commission showed up for surprise inspections, they could find any document in under 2 minutes. Preston didn't even know what SOC2 meant. I watched him Google it during the meeting. That morning, he stood there grinning with his uncle's company credit card, called compliance an outdated support function, and suggested we automate oversight using AI solutions. My department was redundant, he said, overstaffed. My $86,000 salary plus $12,000 in benefits eliminated. That's $98,000 in annual savings, he bragged. Almost a full marketing budget upgrade. Someone actually clapped. I didn't. I just capped my pen and asked, "Are we done here?" Preston nodded like he'd just solved world hunger. I gathered my papers and walked out. No drama, no arguments. In the Navy, when someone makes a decision that's going to sink the ship, you don't waste time arguing. You start planning damage control. Back in my office, I opened a fresh binder and started backing up files. Every access credential, every compliance designation, every legal document where my name appeared as the responsible authority. Most people at Atlantic didn't realize our entire regulatory framework still required my formal signature. Every quarterly filing, every safety certification, every audit response had Vincent Crawford listed as primary contact. Here's the thing nobody bothered to check. No replacement had been designated. Federal law requires board approval and formal reassignment paperwork filed within 21 calendar days. But Preston didn't know that. His Uncle Chuck, the CEO, probably didn't either. They figured firing the compliance guy was like canceling a magazine subscription. Fill out a form, save some money, move on. At first, I thought someone would pump the brakes. Maybe HR would hesitate. Maybe Chuck, who once called me the guy who keeps us out of federal prison, might speak up. But nothing happened. HR sent the reclassification paperwork 4 days later. My new title: Senior Administrative Coordinator. My security clearance was downgraded. My invitations to leadership meetings disappeared overnight. I nodded and smiled. No complaints. Even congratulated Preston when he bragged about hitting his first efficiency target. He actually gave me a thumbs up and called me Vinny C, like we were buddies now. So I printed the original SOC2 designation letter, the one signed by the board in 2019, and emailed it to my personal account with a timestamp. Then I printed 2 copies. One went into my home filing cabinet, the other into a binder labeled Regulatory Continuity, Archive Only, and quietly placed it in the legal department's storage room. 4th shelf, left side. I didn't tell anyone. People think revenge needs to be loud. Dramatic exits and angry speeches about being unappreciated. But nobody appreciates a landmine either until someone steps on it. The real beauty was in Section 12.3 of our business continuity plan, a clause I'd added 3 years ago after watching a competitor get hammered with $4.2 million in fines for improper compliance handoffs. That clause stated that any change to the named compliance officer must be formally reassigned by board resolution within 21 calendar days, or the designation becomes legally invalid retroactive to the vacancy date. Manufacturing compliance fines start at $15,000 per day for minor violations. After 90 days of continued violation, they escalate to $35,000 per day. The math gets ugly fast. Preston had no idea. Legal hadn't checked. Chuck just signed off on the efficiency report without reading the details. They were flying blind into a regulatory minefield, and I was the only one who knew where the mines were buried. 6 weeks after the streamlining, I submitted my resignation, clean and simple. Effective 14 days from today, I will be stepping down from my position at Atlantic Industrial Group. That's it. No drama, no exit interview demands, no company-wide email about being undervalued. They processed it like routine paperwork, disabled my access by end of day. The IT ticket was so rushed they misspelled my name and forgot to update the compliance registry. My daughter Melissa called that night to check on me. She's a junior at Penn State studying engineering. Smart kid, smarter than her old man in most ways, but she inherited my attention to detail. Growing up, she used to help me organize my home workshop, everything in its proper place, every tool accounted for. Dad, you sure about this? What about my tuition? Spring semester's coming up. Trust me, sweetheart, this is going to work out. Your old man didn't spend 22 years in the Navy without learning how to plan for contingencies. Sounds like you've got something up your sleeve. Just following proper procedures. Sometimes that's all it takes. That weekend, I updated my profile on the Federal Compliance Registry, setting my certification to active executive designation relinquished, no replacement filed, effective day 28. Then I registered as an independent consultant specializing in crisis compliance recovery. 24 hours later, my phone started ringing. By Monday, I had 4 serious inquiries, 2 from law firms representing companies in regulatory trouble, 1 from a boutique consulting group, and 1 from a German manufacturing conglomerate that specialized in acquiring American mid-market manufacturers. That last one made me smile. Across town, Atlantic hummed along without missing a beat. No exit procedures, no knowledge transfer, no replacement training. Preston was already planning phase 2 of his optimization strategy. Chuck started talking about the company's new agility mindset in industry interviews. Nobody noticed the compliance clock ticking toward day 22. I set up shop in a small office above Murphy's Deli on Charles Street. 2 desks, a coffee maker that worked half the time, and a view of the harbor. Rent was $800 a month. My first consulting contract paid $285 per hour. The math worked better than my old salary, and I didn't have to listen to Preston explain how artificial intelligence was going to revolutionize everything. Every morning I'd walk downstairs and get coffee from Murphy O'Brien, old Irish guy who'd run the place for 30 years. We'd talk about the Orioles, the weather, sometimes about business. He knew I'd left Atlantic, but didn't pry. Murphy understood when someone didn't want to talk about work. "You know what my father told me when I started this place?" Murphy said one morning, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. "He said the customer who fires you for doing your job right wasn't worth having anyway. Your family's got good instincts. 3 generations of Murphy's Deli. We've seen plenty of businesses come and go. The ones that last are the ones that respect experience." About that time, I got a call from a manufacturing company in Ohio. Their compliance officer had quit without notice, and they were facing a regulatory audit in 6 weeks. Panic mode. I quoted them $350 per hour plus expenses for a 4-week emergency engagement. They said yes before I finished the sentence. The Ohio job was a mess. Their previous compliance officer had been cutting corners for 2 years, thinking nobody would notice. Environmental filings were 6 months behind. Safety protocols hadn't been updated since 2019, and their chemical storage documentation looked like it was written by a high school student. Took me 3 weeks of 14-hour days to get them audit ready, but we passed with minor citations. "How did you learn all this?" asked their plant manager, a guy named Rodriguez who'd been running manufacturing operations for 20 years. "Navy," I said. "Nuclear reactors don't give you second chances. You either do it right the first time, or you don't go home." Next came a chemical manufacturer in Texas. Their previous compliance team had missed a filing deadline with the EPA, and the potential fines were in the millions. My job was to reconstruct their documentation trail and prove good faith compliance efforts. Same skills, different battlefield, military precision and attention to detail. The Texas company had been operating under the assumption that compliance was just bureaucratic paperwork. Their CEO, a former oil executive named Patterson, pulled me aside after my first week. "Crawford, I've got to ask, how long you been doing this? Manufacturing compliance?" 16 years. Before that, 22 years keeping nuclear reactors from melting down. "And you think we can beat these EPA charges?" "Depends how much you want to spend on doing it right versus how much you want to spend on fines." We spent 6 weeks rebuilding their entire compliance framework from scratch. Cost them $180,000 in consulting fees and system upgrades. Saved them $3.2 million in EPA fines. Patterson sent me a case of bourbon and a handwritten note. "Next time, we'll listen to the guy who knows what he's talking about." Meanwhile, back in Baltimore, the escalating fine structure kicked in for Atlantic. Not that anyone there knew it yet. Manufacturing compliance violations become exponentially more expensive after 90 days. The daily penalty jumped from $15,000 to $35,000. Still invisible, still accumulating, still retroactive today, 22. Every morning I'd check my calendar and calculate the growing damage. It was like watching a depth charge sink toward a submarine, knowing exactly when it would explode. Melissa called with news about her acceptance into Penn State's Accelerated Compliance Engineering program. New field, growing demand, excellent job prospects. "Guess who inspired me to look into it," she said. "Your old man's rubbing off on you." More like I realized there's job security in keeping people out of trouble. Plus, the starting salaries are really good. Professor says companies are finally understanding that compliance isn't overhead, it's insurance. Smart girl. She understood what Preston never would. That experience isn't something you can download from the internet or automate with software. It's something you earn one crisis at a time, one audit at a time, one near miss at a time. Day 120, Atlantic announced the deal of the century. Press release went out at 9:00 a.m. Atlantic Industrial Group to be acquired by Braun Industries for $650 million. The story made the Baltimore Business Journal front page. Chuck was quoted extensively about Atlantic's innovative operational transformation under new leadership. Preston was quoted too. He'd positioned himself as the architect of Atlantic's lean operational model that attracted international attention. The article mentioned his strategic elimination of redundant legacy functions as a key factor in Braun's interest. I read it over my morning coffee at Murphy's, sitting at the same table by the window where I'd been having breakfast for 3 months. "Good news?" Murphy asked, refilling my cup without being asked. He had that Irish bartender instinct for reading people's moods. You could say that. Sometimes patience pays off. My grandfather used to run a pub back in Cork. Saw plenty of men get fired for telling the boss things he didn't want to hear. Most of them found better jobs within the year. The bosses who wouldn't listen, half of them lost their businesses. How'd your grandfather know? Simple. A man who fires his best people for doing their job is a man who doesn't know his own business. And a man who doesn't know his own business won't have one for long. Murphy was sharper than most MBA graduates I'd met. He'd kept the same deli running profitably for 30 years by understanding his customers, respecting his suppliers, and never cutting corners on quality. Preston could learn something from him, if Preston was the type to learn from anybody over 40. Day 135, the due diligence team from Braun Industries arrived in Baltimore. Professional, thorough, and led by a woman named Dr. Ingrid Weber, who spoke 5 languages and had the kind of attention to detail that made German engineering legendary. Her team included Klaus Hoffmann, a compliance specialist who'd spent 15 years auditing American acquisitions for European companies. I knew about Klaus from industry publications. He was the guy German companies sent when they wanted to make absolutely sure they weren't buying someone else's problems. Meticulous didn't begin to describe him. Klaus had once killed a $200 million acquisition because the target company's safety officer was 3 days late renewing a forklift certification. They spent the first week reviewing financial records, operational metrics, and safety protocols. Everything looked clean. Preston had prepared beautiful presentations about streamlined operations and reduced overhead. The numbers were impressive. The timeline was aggressive. Chuck had already started talking about integration plans. Braun executives were optimistic. This looked like exactly the kind of lean, efficient American manufacturer they wanted in their portfolio. Atlantic's management team was confident. Legal had reviewed everything twice. The deal was on track for closing in 2 weeks. Day 143, I was in my office working on a compliance manual for a client in Michigan when my phone rang. Rodriguez from the Ohio plant. "Vince, you got a minute? We just passed our follow-up audit with flying colors. EPA inspector said our documentation was the best he'd seen in 5 years. Wanted to thank you again. Just doing my job. How's the new compliance officer working out?" "Great kid. Military background like you. Marines. Says you taught him more in 4 weeks than his MBA program taught him in 2 years. That was the difference between classroom theory and real-world application. You can't learn compliance from a textbook any more than you can learn to drive a submarine from watching YouTube videos. It takes hands-on experience, mentorship from someone who's been through the regulatory wars, and enough mistakes to understand what failure looks like." Day 149. Exactly 21 compliance cycles since my designation had been terminated without replacement. Klaus Hoffmann was in Atlantic's legal archive room cross-referencing regulatory filings with personnel records. Routine due diligence, nothing unusual. He wasn't looking for problems, just verifying that all certifications were current and properly maintained. That's when he found my binder. 4th shelf, left side, exactly where I'd left it 4 months earlier. Regulatory continuity, archive only. Klaus opened it and started reading. The original SOC2 designation letter, the business continuity plan with section 12.3 highlighted, the timeline requirements, the board resolution from 2019 that was never superseded. He spent an hour going through every document, cross-referencing dates with Atlantic's current compliance registry. Then he called Dr. Weber. The math was simple and brutal. Day 22 through day 148 equals 127 days of compliance violation. First 90 days at $15,000 per day equals $1.35 million. Remaining 37 days at $35,000 per day equals $1,295 million. Total exposure, $2.645 million, and climbing at $35,000 per day until resolved. But it got worse. Because no replacement had been designated, every regulatory filing, every safety certification, every compliance document submitted during those 127 days was legally invalid. Atlantic had been misrepresenting its regulatory standing to customers, insurers, and potential buyers for over 4 months, including Braun Industries. Day 149, Thursday morning, 9:15 a.m. Klaus Hoffmann walked into the Atlantic boardroom carrying a folder that would destroy everything Preston had built. "Who is Vincent Crawford?" he asked, setting the folder on the conference table. Preston looked confused. "He used to work here. We restructured his position last year as part of our operational optimization, cost savings measure. But he is still listed as your named SOC2 compliance officer," Klaus said, opening the folder. "According to your federal registry and this documentation, he remains the designated authority for all regulatory filings." Chuck leaned forward. "That's impossible. We handled his transition months ago." Klaus wasn't smiling. "Where is the board resolution replacing him? The formal reassignment documentation? The updated federal notifications?" Silence. Preston started typing frantically on his phone. Chuck was already reaching for his. Legal was called out of another meeting. HR scrambled to find records that didn't exist. We assumed the transition was automatic when we restructured his role, someone from HR offered weakly. Klaus shook his head. Federal compliance designations are never automatic. They require explicit board action and formal replacement within 21 calendar days. You have been operating without valid compliance authority for exactly 127 days, over 6 complete compliance cycles. Dr. Weber, who had been quietly reviewing Klaus's findings, looked up from her laptop. This represents a material misrepresentation of regulatory standing during preliminary negotiations. Preston tried to salvage the situation. It's just paperwork. We can fix this in a day. Bring Vince back, file the forms, move forward. No, Dr. Weber said firmly. You cannot retroactively fix federal compliance violations. Manufacturing compliance fines escalate after 90 days. Your current exposure is $2.645 million, increasing by $35,000 daily. The room went dead quiet. Chuck's face had gone gray. Preston looked like someone had just told him his trust fund was empty. Surely we can resolve this. It's a procedural oversight. Klaus opened his laptop and turned the screen toward the table. Your compliance violations create significant liability exposure for any acquiring entity, but more concerning is the pattern of negligence. Mr. Crawford left detailed documentation showing that proper procedures were available and ignored. He clicked to the next slide. Section 12.3 of your own business continuity plan, authored by Mr. Crawford, explicitly outlines the 21-day requirement. This was not an oversight. This was negligence. Preston's voice cracked slightly. We didn't see that documentation. It was filed in your legal archive with clear labeling, Klaus replied. Mr. Crawford followed proper procedure. Your organization did not. Dr. Weber closed her laptop slowly. This is a material breach of due diligence representations. We need to pause acquisition proceedings pending legal review. Chuck stood up abruptly. Dr. Weber, surely we can work through this. The deal is scheduled to close next week. Mr. Harrington, your company has been operating in federal violation for over 4 months while representing full compliance to potential buyers. This creates exposure for Braun Industries that we cannot accept. Preston tried one more time. What if we bring Vince back immediately? Full reinstatement, whatever it takes. Klaus consulted his notes. Mr. Crawford is listed as an independent consultant. He may not be available for employment. That afternoon, Klaus called me directly. Professional courtesy, he said. Wanted to understand the timeline of my departure and the transition procedures that were supposed to be followed. I was in my office above Murphy's working on a compliance manual for a client in Michigan. The call was expected. I'd been counting days on my calendar, watching the violation accumulate like compound interest. Mr. Crawford, this is Klaus Hoffman from Braun Industries. We are reviewing Atlantic Industrial's regulatory standing as part of acquisition due diligence. Yes, sir. How can I help you? Can you confirm the timeline of your departure and any transition procedures that were implemented? I gave him the dates. Restructured on day 1, resigned effective day 42. Final day, day 56. Explained the proper procedures, confirmed that no formal replacement had ever been designated. When he asked if I'd attempted to notify Atlantic of the compliance gap, I mentioned the binder. Regulatory continuity, archive only, I told him. 4th shelf, left side in legal storage. Should still be there. We found it, Klaus said. Very thorough documentation. Section 12.3 of the business continuity plan appears to address this exact scenario. Yes, sir. I wrote that clause in 2021 after watching a competitor get hit with $4.2 million in fines for improper compliance handoff. Seemed like prudent risk management. Indeed. Are you currently available for consulting engagement? Depends on the scope and timeline. What did you have in mind? Day 150, Friday morning. Dr. Weber called an emergency meeting. Chuck, Preston, the board, legal counsel, everyone who mattered. She laid out the situation in terms that left no room for interpretation. Atlantic Industrial has been operating in violation of federal compliance requirements for 127 days. The regulatory fines currently total $2.645 million and increase by $35,000 daily until resolved. Preston started to interrupt. Dr. Weber held up her hand. Furthermore, every compliance document submitted during this period is legally invalid. This includes safety certifications, environmental filings, and regulatory representations made to Braun Industries during preliminary negotiations. Chuck's voice was barely a whisper. What does this mean for the acquisition? It means the acquisition is terminated, Dr. Weber said flatly. Effective immediately. Our legal team has identified material misrepresentation that creates unacceptable liability exposure. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. Surely we can resolve this. Bring Vince back, fix the paperwork, move forward. Trust has been compromised, Dr. Weber replied. Mr. Crawford provided proper documentation and procedures. Your organization chose to ignore them. This was not an oversight. This was a failure of corporate governance. The Braun team was packed and gone by noon. Their final act was to formally notify Atlantic's board that due diligence had revealed material compliance violations and misrepresentation of regulatory standing. The press release went out Monday morning. Braun Industries withdraws from Atlantic Industrial Acquisition due to unresolved regulatory compliance issues. Atlantic's stock opened down 18% and kept falling. By market close, it had dropped 31% in a single day. The business press picked up the story immediately. Headlines like, "Compliance failure kills 650 years, deal and when cost-cutting goes wrong." Tuesday morning, my phone rang again. Dr. Weber this time. "Mr. Crawford, Braun Industries is interested in retaining your services for a comprehensive compliance review of our North American operations. 18-month contract, $385 per hour. Full autonomy over methodology and timeline. Are you available?" I looked around my little office, coffee maker that worked half the time, view of the harbor, and a stack of consulting contracts that had tripled my old salary. "Yes, ma'am, I'm available." Day 153, Wednesday afternoon. Chuck Harrington announced his early retirement, effective immediately. The press release cited personal reasons and desire to spend time with family. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership transitions and operational restructuring. Preston was asked to submit his resignation by Friday. No press release for that one. Thursday morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Vince, this is Preston. Hope we can connect about industry best practices." No hard feelings. I read it twice, then deleted it. That weekend, I moved into my new office at Braun Industries' North American headquarters in Baltimore. Corner office, 19th floor, view of the harbor. My assignment was simple. Review compliance procedures for all Braun U.S. manufacturing facilities and recommend improvements. Melissa called that evening, excited about her acceptance into Penn State's compliance engineering program. She'd been following the Atlantic story in the business news. "Dad, they're using this as a case study in my business law class. Professor says it's a perfect example of how cutting corners on compliance can destroy shareholder value. What's your take on it? That someone at Atlantic knew exactly what they were doing when they wrote those procedures and someone else ignored them because they thought they knew better. Smart girl, your old man's proud of you. I've been thinking about specializing in manufacturing compliance. Professor says the field's growing, especially with all the international acquisitions happening. Good choice. There's always demand for people who can keep companies out of trouble." Day 365, 1-year anniversary of my restructuring at Atlantic. I was sitting in my Braun office reviewing the final compliance report that would wrap up my contract. 12 facilities, unified procedures, 0 regulatory violations, projected annual savings of $2.8 million through improved efficiency and reduced legal exposure. Dr. Weber had already asked about extending the contract. Braun was expanding their U.S. operations and wanted me to help evaluate potential acquisitions. The work was interesting, the pay was excellent, and the company actually valued compliance expertise. Atlantic Industrial was officially delisted from the Baltimore Stock Exchange that month. The company had been sold in pieces to various buyers, none of whom wanted the compliance liability that came with the corporate entity. Preston's LinkedIn profile said he was exploring new opportunities in operational excellence consulting. Chuck moved to Florida. Me? I'm the guy companies call when they want to make sure their compliance officer is irreplaceable. Because experience beats innovation every single time, especially when the stakes are measured in hundreds of millions and someone's counting on you to know where all the exits are located. Just took them $650 million to figure that out.